I very rarely make my cats the subject of my videos, but as some of you already know, we recently lost our cat Lilli to feline leukemia. But keeping things positive, I would like to talk a little bit about Lilli and my experiences of acquiring a pet in Germany. And if you feel that you know me well enough to want to do something constructive in Lilli's name, I do have one or two suggestions. We have no idea how old she was. The earliest record we have of her is when she was picked up as a stray in, I think, 2015 and taken to an animal shelter. Unfortunately, she was the type of cat that shelters find very difficult to rehome, and so she stayed there for ages until one lady finally adopted her. Now, there's no such thing in Germany as a kill shelter. That is, a shelter that euthanizes perfectly healthy animals simply because they're difficult to rehome. But that does mean that animals can sometimes spend years in a shelter without ever being adopted. Unfortunately, the lady who adopted Lilli very suddenly died, and so the cat ended up back at the shelter. At this point, we got to hear about Lilli and we went to see her. By then, she was traumatized and depressed, and it was very clear to everyone that nobody else was going to adopt her. So obviously, we did. Now, the process was a little bit more elaborate than just the shelter giving us the animal that we pointed to. They had a chat with us to ensure that we could provide a suitable home for Lilli. And as far as I know, this is actually pretty standard practice in Germany. After all, the last thing that the shelter wants is to have the animal brought back to them. Generally speaking, since cats actually prefer to live in groups, they won't usually let people adopt a single cat unless they already have one at home. And as it happens, we were in fact looking for a companion for our other cat, Clyde, whose sister had passed away. And thankfully, the two of them did get along very well and quickly became firm friends. The adoption was not free, although we weren't technically buying a cat. We were given Lilli on condition that we would make a donation to the shelter, which of course is basically run by volunteers. And we also promised to keep them updated on how Lilli was doing. The one thing you're very unlikely to find in Germany is pet shops where you can just walk in and buy a kitten or a puppy. It is theoretically possible for such shops to exist, but animal protection laws make it extremely difficult. So on the whole, pet shops in Germany sell supplies, but not live animals. So the local animal shelter is one option. You can also go to a professional breeder, although that can be quite expensive, and the responsible ones care very much about who adopts their animals. They will refuse to sell you one if they are not completely convinced that they can trust you to look after them properly. But there is nothing to stop you acquiring an animal privately. Clyde and his sister were the kittens of a farm cat, and we heard about them through the friend of one of my wife's colleagues. Now, on the post announcing Lilli's passing, a lot of you commented with condolences, and I'd like to thank you all for that. Some of you also shared your own experiences of losing a pet, and my heart goes out to you also. But I'd like to turn this into something a bit more positive and suggest a few constructive things that you might consider doing in memory of Lilli, or indeed any pets like her. The simplest option would be to find a way to support your local animal shelter. Cash donations will, I'm sure, always be welcome, but shelters might also appreciate donations of toys, food, treats, or even a couple of hours of your time if you have some to spare. Don't be afraid to get in touch with the shelter and ask if there is anything you can do to help. If you are already thinking of adopting an animal, consider adopting from a shelter. And definitely, please consider adopting one that the shelter has difficulty finding a home for, one that isn't necessarily the cutest or the friendliest. Now, as I said, Lilli was just such a problem cat, but after we had her and she came out of her depression, she transformed into one of the most affectionate and sweet-tempered cats I have ever known. However, if you have a little cash to spare and you would like to do something very specific to Lilli's memory, there is something that you can do, but it does start with a very tragic story. In the summer of 2021, the cat wing of the shelter that Lilli came from caught fire. According to investigators, this was caused by an electrical fault. Many cats managed to escape, but about 40 of them were not so lucky and sadly perished. The shelter has been rebuilding, and as I understand it, the new cat wing is nearing completion. But this has obviously been a massive burden on the shelter, which would be extremely grateful for any donation that you can give. I've put a link in the video description that should take you directly to the donations page of the shelter's website. If you have a European bank account, the details for a SEPA transfer are right there. Alternatively, if you have a PayPal account, look for the yellow Spenden button to arrange a donation that way. Now, I'm not expecting anything from anybody. It's just that after reading so many comments from so many people who seemed genuinely touched, even though you never really knew Lilli, I just felt that it might be appropriate to give you this option. In any case, thank you for watching. A normal service will be resumed shortly.